ओम उपदेश साहस्री आदिशंकराचार्य कृतम ईक्षितृत्व प्रकरण 11 चैप्टर 11 नेचर ऑफ द विटनेस ईक्षितृत्वं स्वतःसिद्धं जन्तूनां च ततोऽन्यता अज्ञानादित्यतोऽन्यत्वं सदसीति निवर्त्यते. All beings are by nature pure consciousness itself. It is due to ignorance that they appear to be different from it. Their apparent difference from it is removed by the teaching, thou art existence. Brahman एतावध्यमृतत्वं न किञ्चिदन्यत् सहायकं ज्ञानस्येति ब्रुवच्छास्त्रं सलिङ्गं कर्म बाधते. The scriptures negate Vedic actions with their accessories, the sacred tuft of hair on the head, by saying knowledge alone is the cause of immortality, and that there is nothing else to cooperate with it in producing liberation. सर्वेषां मनसो वृत्तमशेषेण अशेषेण च पश्यतः तस्य मे विशेषेण पश्यतः तस्य मे निर्विकारस्य विशेषस्यात् कथञ्चन. मनोवृत्तं मनश्चैव स्वप्नवत् जागृतीक्षितुः संप्रसादे द्वया सत्त्वा चिन्मात्रः सर्वगो व्ययः. How can there be any special agency, egoism, etc. for a property in me who am changeless by nature and witness the modifications of the minds of all without any exception? How can again there be any change in me who witness the mind and its functions in the waking state as in dream? But as there is the absence, therefore witnessing the mind and its functions is not in the nature of the self. Absence of both the mind and its functions in deep sleep, I am pure consciousness, all pervading and changeless. स्वप्नसत्यो यथा बोधात् देहात्मत्वं तथैव च प्रत्यक्षादेः प्रमाणत्वं जाग्रत्स्यादात्मवेदनात्. Just as dreams appear to be true as long as one does not wake up, so the identification of oneself with the body etc. and the authenticity of sense perception and the like in the waking state continue as long as there is no self-knowledge. व्योमवत् सर्वभूतस्थो भूतदोषैर्विवर्जितः साक्षी चेता गुणशुद्धो ब्रह्मैवास्मीति केवलः. I am Brahman of the nature of pure consciousness, without qualities, free from ignorance, and free from the three states of waking, dream, and deep sleep. Living in all beings like the ether, I am the witness, free from all their defects. नामरूपक्रियाभ्यन्यो नित्यमुक्तस्वरूपवान् अहमात्मा परं ब्रह्म चिन्मात्रोऽहं सदाद्वयः. Ever free and different from names, forms and actions, I am the Supreme Brahman, the Self consisting of pure consciousness and always without a second. Aham brahmasmi karta cha bhokta chasmiti ye viduh te nashta jnana karmabhyam nastiकास्युर्न संशयः. Those who think themselves to be one with Brahman and at the same time to be doers and experiencers should be regarded as fallen from both knowledge and duties. They are no doubt unbelievers in the Vedas. धर्माधर्मफलैर्योग इष्टो दृष्टो यथात्मनः शास्त्रात् ब्रह्मत्वमन्यमप्यस्य मोक्षो ज्ञानात् तथैषताम्. It must be accepted on the strength of the scriptures that the self is Brahman and that liberation accrues from right knowledge only, like the connection with the self, the individual self, of the results of sin and virtue, which, though unseen, is admitted on the same authority. यामाहारजनाद्यास्ता वासना स्वप्नदर्शिभिः अनुभूयन्त एवेह ततोऽन्यः केवलो दृशि. What are called in the Shruti clothes colored with turmeric, etc., are nothing but mental impressions perceived by people in dream. The self, there the knower, knowing, and the known in dream. In dream, illuminator must therefore be different from them and from the subtle body in which they lie. So the self, pure consciousness, the perceiver of doership, etc., must be different from them, that is, from the subtle body and the impressions in it, in the waking state also. कोशादिव विनिष्कृष्टः कार्यकारणवर्जितः यथासिर्दृश्यते स्वप्ने तद्वत् बोद्धा स्वयं प्रभः. Just as a sword taken out of its sheath is seen as it is, so the knower, the self, is seen in dream in its real and self-effulgent nature, free from cause and effect, not as an object, the mind which assumes the forms of causes and effects in dream, Brahman itself. आपेशात् प्रतिबुद्धस्य ज्ञस्य स्वाभाविकं पदम् उक्तं नेत्यादिवाक्येन कल्पितस्यापनेतॄणाम्. The real nature of the individual self who was pushed and awakened has been described by the saying, not this, which negates all superimposition. महागजादयो लोका मयि तद्वत् प्रकल्पिता स्वप्ने तद्वद्वयं विद्याद्रूपं वासनया सह. Just as objects of enjoyment like a great kingship, Maharajadayo Loka, kingship, etc., are superimposed on me in dream and are unreal, so the two forms, the visible and the invisible, with the mental impressions, are also superimposed on me and are similarly unreal, for they are objects of knowledge. देहलिंगात्मना कार्या वासनारूपिणा क्रियाः नेति नेत्यात्मरूपत्वान्न मे कार्या क्रिया क्वचित्. All actions are performed by the self, which has identified itself with the gross and the subtle bodies, and which has the nature of accumulating impressions. This is the individual self. Owing to continual performance of action, as a matter of fact, the subtle body is the seat of mental impressions. As I am of the nature that is pure consciousness, indicated by the Shruti, not this, actions are nowhere to be done by me, neither in waking nor in dream, and also neither by nature nor by Vedic injunctions. न ततो मृतनाशास्ति कर्मणो ज्ञानहेतुतः मोक्षस्य हि ज्ञानहेतुत्वान्न तदन्यदपेक्षते. As actions have ignorance for their cause, there is no hope from them of immortality. As liberation is caused by right knowledge alone, it does not depend on anything else. Actions, etc., Brahman, if it is not so, if it were not so, it would be capable of being produced by actions. अमृतं च भयं नार्तं नेति त्यात्मा प्रियो मम विपरीतमतोऽन्यद्यत् त्यजेत् तत् सक्रियं ततः. But immortality is free from fear and destruction. The individual self, signified by the words dear to one, is Brahman, devoid of all attributes. According to the Shruti, not this, not this. Whatever, therefore, Brahman, not different from the self, is not capable of being realized by actions. The ideas of me and mine with respect to it is the whatever is thought to be different from it, Brahman, should therefore be renounced together with all actions. Prakash Prakaranam 2 12. Chapter 12 Light. Prakashastham yatha deham salokam drashtrabhasam तथा चित्तम द्रष्टाहमिति मन्यते. Just as a man erroneously looks upon his body placed in the sun as having the property of light in it, so he looks upon the intellect pervaded by the reflection of pure consciousness as the self, the witness. यदेव दृश्यते लोके तेना भिन्नत्वमात्मनः प्रपद्यते ततो मूढस्तेनात्मानं न विन्दति. The self gets identified with whatever is seen in the world. It is for this reason that an ignorant man does not know himself to be Brahman. The reason why people mistake the combination of the subtle and the gross bodies for the self is this: identification caused by its reflection. On account of there being the reflection of pure consciousness in the body, the senses, the mind, the intellect, and the body, the senses, the mind, the intellect, vital force. The vital force, they appear to be conscious and cannot therefore be discriminated from the self. दशमस्य नवात्मत्व प्रतिपत्तिवदात्मनः दृश्येषु तद्वद्देवायं मूढो लोको न चान्यथा. An ignorant man gets identified with objects of knowledge and does not know the self which is different from them, like the 10th boy who got identified as it were with the other 9. After swimming across a river, one of the 10 boys counted their number and found that they were only 9. The reason for this was that the boy did not count himself. He got, as it were, identified with the other 9 and could not find that he was the 10th. But he came to know that he was the 10th when he was told so. त्वं कुरु त्वं तदेवेति प्रत्ययावेककालिकौ एकनीडौ कथं स्याता विरुद्धौ न्यायतो वदम्. Say how there can reasonably buy the two contrary ideas. You do this and you are Brahman at the same time and in respect of the same person. देहाभिमानिनो दुःखं नादेहस्य स्वभावतः स्वापवत्तत्प्रहाणाय तत्त्वमित्युच्यते दृशेः. Pain belongs to one identifying oneself with the body. One not identifying oneself with it, as in deep sleep, is therefore by nature free from pain. The teaching, thou art that, is imparted in order that this identification might be removed from the self, which is a not-doer, together with ignorance, its cause. The unity of the self and Brahman is here taught and not action. दृशेच्छाया यदा रूढा मुखच्छायैव दर्शने पश्यंस्तं प्रत्ययं योगे दृष्टात्मेति मन्यते. An ignorant person, yogi in the text, looks upon the intellect as the self when there is the reflection. This is why one attributes the properties, that is agency, experiencing, etc., of the intellect to the self, like those example spots, etc., of the mirror on the face. There is reflection of the self in the intellect like that of a face in a mirror. तं च मूढं च यद्यन्यं प्रत्ययं वेत्ति नो दृशेः स एव योगिनां प्रेष्ठो नेतरस्यान्नत् संशयः. He who looks upon the ego, the discrimination that produces delusion and other mental modifications, or the reflection of the self in them, as having no connection with the self, is without doubt the dearest to the knowers of Brahman. No one else is so. विज्ञातेर्यस्तु विज्ञाता स त्वमित्युच्यते यतः स स्यादनुभवस्तस्य ततोऽन्योऽनुभवो मृषा. As it is the knower of the knowledge that is referred to by the word thou in the Shruti, the understanding of the term thou in this sense is correct. The other, that is the self with the intellect, etc., superimposed on it. Sense different from it is due to superimposition. दृशिरूपे सदा नित्ये दर्शनादर्शने मयि कथं स्यातां ततो नान्यइष्यतेऽनुभवस्ततः. How can there be knowledge or ignorance in me who am eternal and always of the nature of pure consciousness? No knowledge, a mental modification with the reflection of consciousness in it. Therefore, other than the self, pure knowledge can be accepted. यत्स्थस्थापोरवेर्देहे दृशेस्स विषयो यथा तत्वस्थस्तद्वदेवेह दृशेस्स विषयस्तथा. Just as the heat of the sun in a part of the body, together with that part of the body in the object of the knower, so pain and pleasure together with the intellect in which they lie are the objects of the self. प्रतिषिद्धेदमंशज्ञः खमिवैकरसोऽद्वयः नित्यमुक्तस्तदा शुद्धस्सोऽहं ब्रह्मास्मि केवलः. I am Brahman without attributes, ever pure, ever free, non-dual, homogeneous like the ether, and of the nature of consciousness from which the object portion is negated on the authority of the Shruti, not this, not this. विज्ञातुर्नैव विज्ञाता परोऽन्यः सम्भवत्यतः विज्ञाताहं परो मुक्तः सर्वभूतेषु सर्वदा. I am always the free because untouched by the properties of objects of knowledge, superknower in all beings, inasmuch as there cannot be a more comprehensive knower different from me. यो वेदा लुप्तदृष्टित्वम् आत्मनो कर्तृतां तथा ब्रह्मविद्वं तथा मुक्त्वा स आत्मज्ञो न चेतरः. He who knows that the consciousness of the self never ceases to exist and that it is never an agent, and also gives up the egoism that he is the knower, the consciousness I am a knower of Brahman, is a modification of the mind and should not therefore be attributed to the self. Of Brahman is a real knower of the self. Others are not so. ज्ञातैवाहमविज्ञेयं शुद्धो मुक्तः सदेत्यपि विवेकी प्रत्ययो बुद्धेर्दृश्यत्वात् नाशवान्यतः. The modifications of the mind, I am Brahman, capable by no means of being known, I am the knower, and also always free from and pure as the discriminating knowledge in the intellect and not in the self, and liable to be destroyed on account of its being an object of knowledge. अलुप्ता त्वात्मनो दृष्टिर्नोत्पाद्याकारकैर्यतः दृश्यया चान्यया दृष्ट्या जन्यतास्याः प्रकल्पिता. The consciousness, the self, which is consciousness of the self, on the other hand, never goes out of existence and is not capable of being produced by the action of agents, etc., in as much as producibility is superimposed on it by another consciousness, phenomenal consciousness. It contributes its own producibility to the self on account of superimposition. Its object and different from it. देहात्मबुद्ध्यपेक्षत्वादात्मनः कर्तृतां वृषा नैव किञ्चित् करोमीति सत्या बुद्धिः प्रमाणजा. The doership of the self is false as it depends on the misconception of the body being the self. That I do not do anything is the true knowledge which arises from the right evidence, the Vedas. कर्तृत्वं कारकापेक्षमकर्तृत्वं स्वभावतः कर्ता भोक्तेति विज्ञानं ऋषैवेति सुनिश्चितम्. Agency depends on doership, instruments, etc., instruments of action and knowledge. But non-agency is natural. It has therefore been very well ascertained that the knowledge that one is a doer and experiencer is certainly false. एवं शास्त्रानुमानाभ्यां स्वरूपे वगते सति नियोज्योऽहमिति ह्येषा सत्या बुद्धिः कथं भवेत्. How can the idea that I am a person to be enjoined by the Vedas to perform actions be true when the real nature of the self is thus as described in this chapter, known from the scriptures and inference. यथा सर्वान्तरं व्योम व्योम्नोऽप्यभ्यन्तरो ह्यहं निर्विकारो अचलशुद्धो अचरो मुक्तः सदाद्वयः. Just as the ether is in the interior, being the material cause of all the other four elements, so I am the interior, I am the substratum of everything, interior even of the ether. Therefore, I am without change, without motion, pure, devoid of old age, ever free, and without a second. अचक्षुष्व प्रकरणम 13. Chapter 13. Eyelessness. अचक्षुष्त्वन्न दृष्टिर्मे तथा श्रोत्रस्य का श्रुतिः अवाक्त्वान्न तु वक्ति स्यादमनस्त्वान्मतिः कुतः. There is no vision in me as I am without the organ of seeing. How can there be hearing in me who have no auditive organ? Devoid of the organ of speech, I have no action of speaking in me. How can there be thinking in me who have no mind? अप्राणस्य न कर्मास्ति बुद्धिभावेन वेदिता विद्या विद्येत ततो नस्तश्चिन्मात्रज्योतिषो मम नित्यमुक्तस्य शुद्धस्य कूटस्थस्य विचारिणः अमृतस्याक्षरस्यैव मम शरीरस्य सर्वदा. Devoid of the vital force, I have no action in me, and devoid of the intellect, I am not a knower. Ever free, ever pure, changeless, immovable, immortal, imperishable, and bodiless, I have no knowledge or ignorance in me, who am of the nature of the light of pure consciousness only. जिगत्सा वा पिपासा वा शोकमोहो जरामृति न विद्यते शरीरत्वाद् व्योमवत् व्यापिनो मोहः. All pervading like the ether, I have no hunger, thirst, grief, delusion, old age or death, as I am without a body, mind and vital force. अस्पर्शत्वान्न मे स्पृष्टिर्न जिह्वत्वाद् रसज्ञता नित्याविज्ञानरूपस्य ज्ञानाज्ञानेन मे सदा. Devoid of the organ of touch, I have no act of touching, and devoid of the tongue, I have no sensation of taste. I never have knowledge of ignorance, as I am of the nature of eternal consciousness. या तु स्यान् मानसी वृत्तिश्चक्षुष्का रूपरञ्जना नित्यमेवात्मनो दृष्ट्या नित्यया दृश्यते हि सा. It is well known that the mental modification in connection with an object, the intellect gets transformed into the form of that object. This transformation is called a modification. In the mental modification produced through the instrumentality of the eye and of the form of the object of vision is always witnessed by the eternal consciousness of the self. तथान्येन्द्रिययुक्ताया वृत्तयो विषयांजनाः स्मृतिरागादिरूपा च केवलान्तर्मनस्यपि मानस्य तद् वदन्यस्य दृश्यन्ते स्वप्नवृत्तयः द्रष्टुर्दृष्टिस्ततो नित्या शुद्धानन्ता च केवला. Similarly, other mental modifications in the forms of objects of knowledge produced through the instrumentality of other organs, and also those in the forms of memory, attachment, etc., existing only within the mind, and these modifications do not assume the forms of external objects but of their impressions only. Again in dream and are witnessed by one different from all of them, that is by the self. The knowledge therefore of the knower, that is the self which is knowledge itself, just as by the heat of fire, which means the heat which is fire itself, is eternal, pure, infinite and without a second. अनित्या सा विशुद्धेति गृह्यतेऽत्र विवेकतः सुखी दुःखी तथा चाहं दृश्ययोपाधिभूतया. It is through the indiscrimination between the self and the modifications of the mind, knowable adjuncts to the self, that the knowledge of the knower is wrongly conceived by the people to be impure and transitory, and the self happy or miserable. मूढया मूढ इत्येवं शुद्धया शुद्ध इत्यपि मन्यते सर्वलोकोऽयं येन संसारमृच्छति. All men misconceive themselves to be ignorant or pure according as they identify themselves with the mental modification. I am ignorant or I am pure. It is for this reason that they continue to be in transmigratory existence. अचक्षुष्कादिशास्त्रोक्तं सबाह्याभ्यन्तरं त्वजं नित्यमुक्तमिहात्मानं मुमुक्षुश्चित् सदा स्मरेत. One should always remember the self to be ever free, unborn, and comprising the interior and exterior as described in the Shruti, in which the self is spoken of as eyeless and so on, if one is an aspirant after liberation. अचक्षुष्कादिशास्त्राच्च नेन्द्रियाणि सदा मम अप्राणो ह्यमना शुभ्र इति चाथर्वणेर्वचः. That organs never belong to me is known from the Shruti, eyeless, etc. There is again the saying of the Shruti. Thus both the Shrutis prove the same thing. There is already belong Shruti belonging to the Atharva Ved, that the self is devoid of the vital force, devoid of the mind and pure. शब्दादीनां भावश्च श्रूयते मम काटके अप्राणो ह्यमनायस्मादविकारी सदा ह्यहम्. As I am always devoid of the vital force and the mind and heard of in the Kathopanishad as having no connection with sound, etc. I am always changeless. विक्षेपो नास्ति तस्मान् मे न समाधिस्ततो मम विक्षेपो वा समाधिर्वा मनसः स्याद् विकारिणः. I therefore have neither unrestfulness nor a profound concentration. Both of them belong to the mind, which is subject to change. अमनस्कस्य शुद्धस्य कथं तस्याद्वयं मम अमनस्त्वा विकारित्वे विधेह व्यापिनो मम. How can I, who am pure and mindless, have those two? I am without any change and without a mind, as I am all pervading and devoid of a body. इत्येतद्यावदज्ञानं तावत् कार्यं ममाभवत् नित्यमुक्तस्य शुद्धस्य बुद्धस्य च सदा मम. So I, who am ever free, ever pure and ever awakened, had duties to perform so long as there was ignorance. समाधिर्वा कार्यं चान्यत् कुतो भवेत् मां हि ध्यात्वा च बुद्ध्वा च मन्यन्ते कृतकृत्यताम्. How can I have concentration, non-concentration or other actions in me, as all men feel that the acme of their lives is fulfilled when they meditate on me and know me. Aham brahmasmi sarvosmi shuddho buddhosmi tassada ajas sarvatah evaham ajarascha kshayo mritah. I am therefore Brahman, the all-comprehensive principle, ever pure, ever awakened and ever unborn, devoid of old age, imperishable and immortal. Madanyas sarvabhuteshu bodha kaschinna vidyate कर्माध्यक्षश्च साक्षी च चेता नित्यो गुणोद्वयः. There is no knower other than myself among all the beings. I am the distributor of the results of their actions and the witness. It is I to whom all beings owe their consciousness. Without qualities and without a second, I am eternal. न सच्चाहं न चासच्च नोभयं केवलः शिवः न मे सन्ध्या न रात्रिर्वा नाहर्वा सर्वदा दृशेः. I am not the three, means earth, water, fire, visible elements, nor the two, air and ether, invisible ones. Neither am I both, that is their combination, the body. I am devoid of all attributes and the three gunas, sattva, rajas, tama, the three constituents, essences of Maya, the power of Brahman transforming itself into the universe. In me there is neither night. These words may also mean deep sleep, waking and dream respectively, nor day, nor their juncture, as I am always of the nature of light, that is consciousness. सर्वमूर्तिवियुक्तं यद् यथाखं सूक्ष्ममद्वयं तेनाप्यस्मि विना भूतं ब्रह्मैवाहं तथाद्वयम्. Just as the ether is subtle, without a second, and devoid of all forms, so I am the non-dual Brahman, devoid even of the ether. ममात्मा स्वतात्मेति भेदो व्योम्नो यथा भवेत् एकस्य श्रुषिभेदेन तथा मम विकल्पितः. The distinction between the self in itself, Brahman, and myself is due to the superimposition of different, the intellect, etc., adjuncts on one and the same self. Just as different just as difference is wrongly conceived to exist in one and the same ether owing to apertures in various objects. भेदो भेदस्तथा चैको नाना चेति विकल्पितः. ज्ञेयं ज्ञाता गतिर्गन्ता मय्येकस्मिन् कुतो भवेत्. How can difference, absence of difference, oneness, manyness, and the qualities of being known and being a knower, the results of actions and also agency and experiencing be attributed to me who am one only? न मे हेयं न चादेयम् अविकारी यतो ह्यहम् सदा मुक्तस्तथा शुद्धस्तदा बुद्धो गुणोद्वयः. I have nothing to reject or accept, inasmuch as I am changeless, always free, pure, awakened, and without qualities. I am without a second. इत्येवं सर्वदात्मानं विद्यात् सर्वं समाहितः विदित्वा मां स्वधेयहस्तं ऋषिर्मुक्तो ध्रुवो भवेत्. One should, with great concentration of mind, always know the self to be all Brahman. One certainly becomes all-knowing and free from one knows me to be residing in one's own body as the witness of the body, gross and subtle. कृतकृत्यश्च सिद्धश्च योगी ब्राह्मण एव च य एवं वेद तत्त्वार्थम् अन्यथा ह्यात्मः भवेत्. He who thus knows the reality of the self becomes successful in attaining the goal of his life and becomes perfect. He becomes a knower of Brahman and one. For a knower of Brahman becomes Brahman, one with it. One knowing the self otherwise may be said to commit suicide, for the self remains hidden, killed as it were. वेदार्थो निश्चितो ह्येष समासेन मयोदितः सन्न्यासिभ्यः प्रवक्तव्यः शान्तेभ्यः शिष्टबुद्धिना. This ascertained meaning of the Vedas described briefly by me should be imparted to those who have given up worldly action and controlled their minds by one whose intellect has been trained according to the scriptures under a teacher who has known Brahman. स्वप्नस्मृति प्रकरणम 14 चैप्टर 14 ड्रीम एंड मेमरी स्वप्नस्मृत्योर्घटादेर्हि रूपाभासप्रदृश्यते पुरा नूनं तदाकाराधीर्दृष्टेत्यनुमीयते as the resemblance of objects of knowledge like jars etc. is perceived in dream and memory, it is inferred that the intellect in those forms was surely seen before. भिक्षामटन्यथा स्वप्ने दृष्टो देहो न स स्वयं जाग्रद्दृश्यात् तथा देहात् द्रष्टोत्वादन्य एव सः. Just as the body being from place to place for aims, the only means of subsistence according to the scriptures for those who have given up worldly action in search of the knowledge of Brahman. Aims seen example by a wandering mendicant in dream is not oneself, so witnessing the body in the waking state, the seer must be different from it as it is seen. मूषासिक्तं यथा ताम्रं तन्निभं जायते तथा रूपादीन् व्याप्नोवच्चित्तं तन्निभं दृश्यते ध्रुवम्. Pervading objects like forms, colors, etc., the mind appears to be exactly like them, just as molten copper assumes the form of a mold when poured into it. व्यंजको वा यथा लोको व्यङ्गस्था व्यङ्ग्यस्याकारतामियात् सर्वार्थौ व्यञ्जकत्वाद्धीरर्थाकारा प्रदृश्यते. Or just as light, the revealer assumes the forms of the objects revealed by it, so the intellect looks like all things inasmuch as it reveals them. धीरेवार्थस्वरूपा हि पुंसा दृष्टा पुरापि च न चेत् स्वप्ने कथं पश्येत् स्मरतो वा कृतिः कुतः. It was the intellect in the forms of objects of knowledge that was seen before in the state of waking and experiencing by the seer. How can he see them in dream or remember their forms if that were not the case? व्यञ्जकत्वं तदेवास्य रूपाद्याकारदृश्यतां द्रष्टृत्वं च दृशेस्तद्वद् व्याप्तिस्याधिय उद्भवे. That intellect is seen in the forms of objects of vision etc. is what is meant by saying that it reveals. In assuming the forms of objects, the intellect gets changed, but the self does not get changed in pervading the modifications of the intellect. It does it by means of its reflection. The self is said to witness the modifications of the intellect as it pervades them whenever they arise. चिन्मात्रच ज्योतिषा सर्वा सर्वदेहेषु बुद्धयः मया यस्मात् प्रकाशन्ते सर्वस्यात्मा ततो ह्यहम्. I am the self of all as the intellects of all beings are illumined by me who am of the nature of the light of consciousness only. Karanam karma karta cha kriya swapne phalam cha dhihi jagratyevam yato drashta tasmat yatonyatha. It is the intellect as there are no external objects in that state. that becomes the instrument, the object, the agent, actions, and their results in dream. It is known to be so in the waking state also, for the existence of external objects depends on the intellect. Otherwise, they might be perceived in deep sleep also when the intellect is not there. The seer is therefore, that is, the self is therefore different from the intellect and its objects. बुद्ध्यादीनामनात्मत्वं हेयोपादेयरूपतः हानोपादानकर्तात्मा न त्याज्यो न च गृह्यते. As they are susceptible of appearance and disappearance, of disappearance, the intellect, etc., are not the self. The self is the cause of their appearance and disappearance and cannot be made to appear or disappear. सबाह्याभ्यन्तरे शुद्धे प्रज्ञानैकरसे घने बाह्यमाभ्यन्तरं चान्यत् कथं हेयं प्रकल्प्यते. How can an interior, an exterior, or any other thing be attributed to the self which comprises the interior and the exterior, is pure and of the nature of homogeneous consciousness? य आत्मा नेति नेतीति परापोहेन शेषितः स चेत् ब्रह्मविदात्मेष्टो यतेतातः परं कथम्. Why should a knower of Brahman make any more effort if the self which is left over by negating the non-self according to the Shruti, not this, is considered to be his self? अशनायात्यतिक्रान्तं ब्रह्मैवास्मि निरन्तरम् कार्यवान्स्यां कथं चाहं विमृशे देवमञ्जसा. One should rightly think thus: I am all-pervading Brahman, beyond hunger, etc. How can I have actions? पारगस्तु यथा नद्यास्तस्थः पारं यासति आत्मज्ञश्चेत् तथा कार्यं कर्तुमन्याद्दिहेच्छति. A knower of the self will wish to perform actions if one who has reached the other bank of a river wish to reach that bank while there. आत्मज्ञस्यापि यस्य स्याद्धहानोपादानता यदि न मोक्षार्हस्य विज्ञेयो वान्तौ सो ब्रह्मणा ध्रुवम्. A so-called knower of the self, having the ideas of acceptance and rejection, should be regarded as not fit for liberation, but must be considered to be certainly rejected by Brahman. सादित्यं हि जगत्प्राणस्तस्मान्नाहर्निशैव वा प्राणज्ञस्यापि न स्यातां कुतो ब्रह्मविदो द्वये. Even though he has not gone beyond all difference, for a knower of prana, prana is the being identifying himself with the universe. A meditator on prana gets identified with him. Even for a knower of prana, the world which with the sun is prana, and therefore there is no day. So no duty is to be done in particular hours of the day and night, and no night for him. How then can they be for a knower who has gone beyond duality of Brahman, in which there is no duality? न स्मरत्यात्मनो ह्यात्मा विस्मरेद्वाप्यलुप्तचित् मनोऽपि स्मरति चेतत् ज्ञानमज्ञानहेतुजम्. The self whose consciousness never ceases to exist, neither remembers. Therefore, a man of knowledge is free from the duty of concentrating his mind. neither remembers nor forgets itself. That the mind remembers the self is also knowledge caused by ignorance, for the mind is non conscious and cannot remember anything. ज्ञातुर्नेयः परो ह्यात्मा सो विद्या कल्पितस्मृतः अपोढे विद्यया तस्मिन् रज्ज्वां सर्पैवाद्वयः. If the Supreme Self be an object of the knowledge of the knower, it must be superimposing. It must be a superimposition due to the ignorance. It is the self without a second when that superimposition is negated by right knowledge, like a snake in a rope. कर्तृ कर्मफलाभावात् सबाह्याभ्यन्तरं ह्यजं ममाहं वेत्ति यो भावस्तस्मिन् कस्यं कुतो भवेत्. Who and for what reason will attribute the ideas of me and mine to the self, as it is unborn and comprises the interior and exterior on account of the fact that the agent, actions and their results do not exist. आत्मा ह्यात्मीय इत्येष भावो विद्या प्रकल्पितः आत्मैकत्वे ह्यसो नास्ति बीजाभावे कुतः फलम्. For the ideas me and mine are superimposed on the self due to ignorance. They do not exist when the self is known to be one only. How can there be an effect without a cause? द्रष्टृ श्रोतृ तथा मन्त्रो विज्ञात्रैव तदक्षरम् दौष्ट्रादन्यस्य तस्य तद्यस्मात् तस्मात् द्रष्टाहमक्षरम्. It is the individual self known to be the seer and hearer, the thinker and the knower, that is Brahman, the imperishable one. As the individual self is not different from it, I, the seer, am the imperishable principle. स्थावरं जङ्गमं चैव द्रष्टृत्वादि क्रियायुतं सर्वमक्षरमेवातः सर्वस्यात्माक्षरं त्वहम्. As all beings, moving and non-moving, are endowed with actions such as seeing, etc., they are Brahman, the imperishable one. Therefore, I am the self of all, the indestructible one. अकार्यशेषमात्मानमक्रियात्मक्रियाफलं निर्ममं निरहङ्कारं यः पश्यति स पश्यति. He has the truest knowledge, who looks upon the self as a non-agent, having no connection with actions and their results, and regards it as free from the ideas of me and mine. ममाहङ्कार्यज्ञेच्छा शून्या एव स्वभावतः आत्मनीति यदि ज्ञातमाध्वं स्वस्थाक्यमे हितैः. Be in peace. What is the use of efforts if the self has been known to be naturally free from the ideas me and mine and from efforts and desires? योऽहं कर्तारमात्मानं तथा वेत्तारमेव च वेत्ति नात्मज्ञ एवासौ योऽन्यथाज्ञः स आत्मवित्. One who looks upon the self as an agent of actions and a knower of objects is not a knower of the self. One who knows it otherwise as a non-agent and non-experiencer is a real knower of it. यथान्यत्वेऽपि तादात्म्यं देहादेष्वात्मनो मतं तथा कर्तुरविज्ञानात् फलकर्मात्मतात्मनः. Just as the self is identified with the body, etc., though different from them, so it is looked upon as the agent of actions and experiencer of their results, owing to the fact that it is not, that is, the self is not discriminated from the subtle body. It is not known to be a non-agent. दृष्टि श्रुति मतिर्ज्ञाति स्वप्ने दृष्टा जनैः सदा तासामात्मस्वरूपत्वादतः प्रत्यक्षतात्मनः. Seeing, these are mental modifications through the instrumentality of various organs. As the mind with these modifications is witnessed by the self in dream, it must be different from them. Seeing, hearing, thinking and knowing are always experienced by people in dream. Moreover, as they are essentially the self, it is directly known. The meaning is this: the mind merges in the self as primeval ignorance during deep sleep, but the self then, as always, exists in its nature of pure consciousness. Therefore, it is clear that the self is different from the mind and exists as the witness of this phenomenon. That is what is meant by saying in the verse that the self is directly known. परलोक भयं यस्य नास्ति मृत्यु भयं तथा तस्यात्मज्ञस्य शोच्यासु स्युः स ब्रह्मेन्द्रा अपीश्वराः. Even powerful beings including Brahma and Indra, the king of gods in heaven, are objects of pity to that knower of the self who has no fear about the next world nor is afraid of death. ईश्वरत्वेन किं तस्य ब्रह्मेन्द्रत्वेन वा पुनः तृष्णा चेत् सर्वतश्चिन्ना सर्वदैन्योद्भवा शुभा अशुभा. What is the use of his becoming a powerful one or becoming Brahman or Indra if all inauspicious desires, the cause of misery, are entirely uprooted? अहमित्यात्मधीर्या च ममेत्यात्मीयधीरपि अर्थशून्ये यदा यस्य स आत्मज्ञो भवेत् तदा. He is a knower of the self to whom the ideas me and mine have become quite meaningless, that is unreal. बुद्ध्यादौ सत्युपाधौ च तथा सत्यविशेषता यस्य चेदात्मनो ज्ञाता तस्य कार्यं न विद्य भवेत् तस्य कार्यं कथं भवेत्. How can there be any action in one who finds no difference in the self both when in waking and dream, the intellect, etc., its adjuncts exist, and when in deep sleep they do not. प्रसन्ने विमले व्योम्नि प्रज्ञानैकरसे द्वये उत्पन्नात्मधियो भूत किमन्यत् कार्यमिष्यते. Say, what action might be desired to be done by one who has known himself to be without a second, who is of the nature of homogeneous consciousness, both natural and adventitious, like the ether. आत्मानं सर्वभूतस्थममित्रं चात्मनोऽपि यः पश्यन्निच्छत्यसौ नूनं शीतीकर्तुं विभावसुम्. He who sees the self in all beings and at the same time feels that he has enemies desires surely to make fire cold. प्रज्ञा प्राणानुकार्यात्मा छाये वाक्षादिगोचरः ध्यायति वेति चोक्तो हि शुद्धो मुक्तस्वतो हि सः. The self which has for its adjuncts the intellect and the vital force is reflected in the modifications of the intellect and in the senses like the sun reflected in water. For example, the self is free and pure by nature, even in that condition, as it is said in the Shruti. It is at rest, as it were. The real sun in the sky never moves with the movement of the water in which it is reflected, though the reflection does so. So the self does not change with the changes in the intellect in which it is reflected. The meaning of the Shruti quoted is that the self is not conditioned, has either rest or motion. It is always pure. Rest and motion are in the intellect. अप्राणस्य मनस्कस्य तथा संसर्गिणो दृशेः व्योमवत् व्यापिनो यस्य कथं कार्यं भवेन् मम. How can I have actions who am pure consciousness, devoid of the vital force and the mind, unattached and all-pervading like the ether? असमाधिं न पश्यामि निर्विकारस्य सर्वदा ब्रह्मणो मे विशुद्धस्य शौध्यं नान्यद्विपाप्मनः गन्तव्यं च तथा नैव सर्वगस्याचलस्य च नोर्ध्वं नाधस्थिरो वापि निष्कलस्य गुणत्वतः. As I am Brahman, always changeless and pure, I never see the absence of concentration in me, and free from sin and virtue, I find nothing in me to be purified. As I am without parts, without qualities, without motion, and all pervading, I do not find on my part the action of going or a place to go. Example, the sphere of Brahma, where the knowers of the qualified Brahman go at the end of their earthly career. To go to the action or going to a place to go to, nor do I find an upward or downward or an oblique direction. Chinmatra Jyotisho Nityam Tamastasmin na vidyate Katham Karyam Mamaivadya Nityamuktasya Shishtate. How can any action be left for me who am ever free? For the self is always of the nature of the light of pure consciousness and hence devoid of ignorance. Amanaskasya ka chinta kriya vanendriyasya ka aprano yamana shubhra iti satyam shruter vacha. How can there be any thought in one who has no mind and actions in one who has no senses? The Shruti truly says that the self is pure, devoid of the vital force and the mind. अकालत्वाददेशत्वाददिक्त्वादनिमित्ततः आत्मनो नैव कालादेरपेक्षा ध्यायतः सदा. Always meditating on the self, one has nothing to do with time, etc. Including the senses. The proper time, place, etc. are are, on the other hand, necessary for Vedic actions. As the self is in no way connected with time, space, direction, and causation. यस्मिन् देवाश्च वेदाश्च पवित्रं कृष्णमेकतां व्रजेत्तन्मानसं तीर्थं यस्मिन् स्नात्वा मृतो भवेत्. The mind, the consciousness I am Brahman, is the place of pilgrimage because it makes a man free from ignorance, the root of all sins and virtues. Where the Devas, the presiding deities of places of pilgrimage, the Vedas, the study etc. of the Vedas, and all other purifying agencies, the uttering of sacred names etc. become one because of the appearance of the all-pervading Brahman in the mind. A bath merging in Brahman, just as a man merges into water while bathing. In that place of pilgrimage makes one immortal. न चास्ति शब्दादिरनन्यवेदनः परस्परेणापि न चैव दृश्यते परेण दृश्यास्तु यथा रसादयस्तथैव दृश्यत्वतैव दैहिका. Non-conscious objects of knowledge like sound, touch, sight, taste and smell, etc. cannot illumine themselves nor one another. Therefore, taste, etc. are illumined by one, the self, other than themselves. They pertain to the body as they are objects of knowledge. अहं ममेत्येषणयत्नविक्रिया सुखादयस्तद्वदिह प्रदृश्यतः दृश्यत्वयोगाच्च परस्परेण तेन दृश्यतां यान्ति ततः परो भवान्. The objects of knowledge, the ego and other changes described as mind, such as desires, efforts, pleasure, etc., cannot similarly, like sound, touch, etc., see the above verses. Cannot similarly illumine themselves. They cannot illumine one another for the same reason, as they are objects of knowledge. You, the self, are therefore different from them. अहं क्रियाद्या हि समस्तविक्रिया सकलकृका कर्मफलेन संहता चितिस्वरूपेण समन्ततोर्कवत् प्रकाश्यमानासि तथात्मनो यतः. All the changes such as egoism etc. have an agent and are connected with the results of actions. They are illumined completely by pure consciousness like the sun. The self therefore is free from bondage. दृशिस्वरूपेण हि सर्वदेहिनां वियद्यथा व्याप्यमनांस्यवस्थितः अतो न तस्मादपरोऽस्ति वेदिता परोऽपि तस्मादत एक ईश्वरः. As the minds of all embodied beings are pervaded by the self as consciousness, which is its nature, like the ether which pervades jars, etc. There is neither a lower, the individual, nor a higher, Ishwar, the creator, preserver and the destroyer of the universe, nor other than itself. So there is one non-dual, universal self, pure consciousness only. शरीर बुद्ध्योर्यदि चान्य दृश्यता निरात्मवादास्तु निराकृता मया परश्च शुद्धो य विशुद्धिकर्मतस्तु निर्मलः सर्वगतोऽसितोऽद्वयः. The doctrine that there is no self has been well refuted by me. as the gross, and it stands for the doctrine that the self is a void, that it is momentary, and so on. It is refuted by me as the gross and the subtle bodies are illumined by one, the self, different from them. It, the self, is unalloyed with actions, that is, sin and virtue, that causes impurity and beyond them. It is very pure, all pervading, free from bondage, and without a second. घटादिरूपं यदि तेन गृह्यते मनः प्रवृत्तं बहुधा स्ववृत्तिभिः अशुद्धचिद्रूपविकारदोषता मतेर्यथा वारयितुं न पार्यते. If, according to you, the mind which assumes various forms like those of jars and other things, through its modifications, be not illumined by the self, the defects in it in the forms of impurity, non consciousness, and change cannot be prevented like those in the mind. If one does not accept that the self is the witness of the mind, etc., and therefore unattached to it, it is inevitable that the defects of the mind will tarnish the self. Liberation becomes impossible in that case. यथा विशुद्धं गगनं निरन्तरं न सज्जते नापि च लिप्यते तथा समस्तभूतेषु सदैव तेष्वयं समस्तदात्मा यजरोवरो भयः. Just as the pure and limitless ether does not get attached nor tainted, so the self is also always the same in all beings and free from old age, death, and fear. अमूर्तमूर्तानि च कर्मवासना दृशिस्वरूपस्य बहिःप्रकल्पिताः अविद्यया ह्यात्मनि मूढदृष्टिभिरपोह्यनेतीत्यवशेषितो दृशिः. The elements, the gross body consisting of the five elements, with and without forms, and the seat, that is the subtle body of desires superimposed through delusion by ignorance people on the self, are thrown, that is negated from it, out of it, which consist of consciousness only, on the authority of the Vedic evidence. Not this, not this. The self alone is the leftover. In this verse, the whole of the gross and the subtle universes are negated from the self. प्रबोधरूपं मनसोऽर्थयोगजं स्मृतौ च सुप्तस्य च दृश्यतोऽर्थवत् तथैव देहप्रतिमानतः पृथक् दृशेः शरीरं च मनश्च दुष्यतः. The impressions arising on account of the contact of the mind with the objects known in the waking state are perceived like objects, that is, like those in the waking state, in memory and dream. So the body, the mind, and their impressions are different from the self, as they are objects of perception. The meaning is this: as they are objects of perception, the body, etc., are unreal, like dream objects. स्वभावशुद्धे गगने घनादिके मले पयाते सति च विशेषता यथा च तद्वत् श्रुतिवारितद्वये सदा विशेषो गगनोपमे दृशौ. Just as impurities like clouds, etc., do not produce any alteration in the naturally pure ether by their appearance or disappearance, so there is never any alteration in the ether like consciousness, free from duality, negated by the Shruti. अध्याय प्रकरण 15 नान्यदन्यत् प्रकरणम चैप्टर 15 impossibility of one being another नान्यदन्यत् भवेद् यस्मान्नान्यत् किञ्चित् विचिन्तयेत् अन्यस्यान्यत्वभावे हि नाशस्तस्य ध्रुवो भवेत्. As one cannot become another, one should not consider Brahman to be different from oneself. For if one becomes another, one is sure to be destroyed. The idea is this: the individual self is considered to be really different from Brahman, cannot become Brahman as long as it exists. And if it were destroyed, who would then become Brahman? Therefore, one should know that one is not different from it, and it is not different from one. स्मरतो दृश्यते दृष्टं पटे चित्रमिवार्पितं यत्र येन च तौ ज्ञेयौ सत्त्वक्षेत्रज्ञसंज्ञकौ. Things seen in the waking state are seen like a picture painted on a canvas when one remembers them. Those by and in which they are so seen are respectively known as the individual self and the intellect. फलान्तं चानुभूतं यद्यूतं कर्त्रादिकारकैः स्मर्यमाणं हि कर्मस्थं पूर्वं कर्मैव तच्चितः. What is perceived to be connected with karakas? In grammar, the relation subsisting between a noun and a verb in a sentence or between a noun and other words governing it are karakas, and entailing results, pleasure or pain, is found to be in the category of objects when it is remembered. The seat, that is the intellect, therefore in which it was perceived before, was an object of consciousness. द्रष्टुश्चान्यत् भवेत् दृश्यं दृश्यत्वात् भटवत्सदा दृश्या द्रष्टा सजातीयो न धीवत्साक्षितान्यथा. The seen, example the intellect, is always different from the seer, as it is an object of knowledge like a jar. The seer is of a nature different from that of the seen. Otherwise, the seer would be devoid of the nature of being the witness like the intellect. स्वात्मबुद्धिमपेक्षासौ विधीनां स्यात् प्रयोजकः जात्यादिशवत्तेन तद्वन्नानात्मतान्यथा. When they are considered to be one's own, caste, etc., become the cause of injunctions like a dead body. A dead body thought to be one's father or mother becomes the cause of being cremated by sons and others. They do not therefore belong to the self, like the dead body which is no longer a father or mother. The self would otherwise become the non-self. If caste etc. were regarded as belonging to the self. न प्रिया प्रिय इत्युक्तेर्नादेहत्वं क्रियाफलम् देहयोगक्रिया हेतुस्तस्माद् विद्वान् क्रियास्त्यजेत्. As it is said in the Shruti, pleasure and pain do not touch one who is bodiless, that is in part liberated even in life. Bodilessness, that is liberation, is not the result of actions. The cause of our connection with a body is action. Therefore, an aspirant after knowledge should renounce actions. कर्मस्वात्मा स्वतन्त्रश्चेन्निवृत्तं च तथेष्यताम् अदेहत्वे फले कार्ये ज्ञाते कुर्यात् कथं क्रियाः. If the self is considered to be independent with regard to the performance of actions, it must be so with regard to their renunciation also. Why should therefore one perform actions when the result, that is liberation, is known to be bodilessness, which cannot be produced by actions? जात्यादीन् सम्परित्यज्य निमित्तं कर्मणां बुधः कर्महेतुविरुद्धं यत् स्वरूपं शास्त्रतः स्मरेत्. After giving up caste etc., which are the causes of duties, a wise man should constantly remember from the scriptures his own real nature, which when known is incompatible with causes, caste etc., due to ignorance of the self. Causes of duties. आत्मैकः सर्वभूतेषु तानि तस्मिंश्चखे यथा पर्यगात् व्योमवत् सर्वं शुक्रं दीप्तिमदिश्यते. The one and the same self is in all beings and they are in it, just as all beings are in the ether. As by the ether everything is pervaded by the self, which is considered to be pure and consisting of the light of pure consciousness. व्रणस्नायुवोरभावेन स्थूलं देहं निवारयेत् शुद्धापापतया लेपं लिङ्गं चाकायमित्युतः. By negating wounds and sinews, the Shruti negates the gross body from the self. Being pure and free from sin and virtue, the self is free from all the impressions of pain and pleasure. The Shruti again discards the subtle body by calling the self bodiless. वासुदेवो यथा श्वत्थे स्वदेहे च ब्रवीत् समं तद्वद्वेत्ति आत्मानं समं स ब्रह्मवित्तमः. One knowing the self to be the same everywhere, like Vasudeva means Sri Krishna, who speaks of the same self residing in a peepal tree and in his own body, is the best of the knowers of Brahman. यथा ह्यन्यशरीरेषु ममाहन्तात् न चेष्यते अस्मिंश्चापि तथा देहे धीसाक्षित्वा विशेषतः. Just as the ideas of me and mine are not thought to exist in other bodies, so also they do not exist in one's body, one's own. For the self is the common witness of all intellects.